Okay, so I've been looking back. I ordered this online through eBay. I've been buying old articles or old magazines of the hockey news from the 80s. Yeah, yeah, the 80s. And there's one from 92 in here as well that I'm really anxious about. And the reason for this one is because A Wing and a Prayer, Jacques Demers is one, Joe Murphy's the other. Remember Joe Murphy was the draft pick? There's two things I want to touch on in here. First off, the draft, because we've discussed drafts before, and I always get asked, who won, who lost the draft, and they got all this Joe Murphy talk in here. James Carson was the number 2 draft pick by the Kings. He became Jimmy Carson later. Neil Brady by New Jersey. Zarly Zalapski by Pittsburgh. Sean Anderson by Buffalo. Vinny Domfus, number 6 by Toronto. And then the Canucks drafted Dan Woodley. They talk about who gets elected to Hall of Fame. Jacques Demers, coach for all teams. Here we are. This is really, really, really big. There you go. So tell me what it feels like to be drafted by the Red Wings. And there's the bag over his head. So again, when I talk about how Detroit didn't have it going on at that point, they weren't really considered favorites for much of anything other than drafting first overall every year. And then they talk about draft picks. Talk about Kerry Huffman in here for the Flyers. Of course, he'd get traded in the Lindros deal. But this is the important one because we're still talking about this. We're still discussing this. So this is by Bob McKenzie. So Bob McKenzie writing for the Hockey News. That's about as important sounding as you can get. The fight to ban fighting in the National Hockey League is really no fight at all. Scored as a TKO in the first round, no contest. That's just one of the several findings of the Hockey News survey of NHL general managers, the results of which are significant when you consider that these men will gather later this summer to discuss this issue and others related to violence in the game. And when they emerge from their meeting, it's likely that their first report to the NHL Board of Governors will recommend either stiffer penalties for chronic glove droppers or instruction for on-ice officials to persecute players to the letter of the law. That is, one way or the other, we'll probably see a dramatic increase in the number of penalties assessed to the instigator of a fight. This was the instigator. This is where it all started. Look for a player to get 7 minutes, 5 for fighting and a 2-minute minor for instigating, and the other to receive only a major for fighting or a minor roughing. That would appear to be as far as GMs are willing to go. Certainly the results of the survey indicate there's no widespread movement among the GMs to adopt the existing rules of international and college hockey that call for any player assessed a fighting major to be ejected from the game. All 21 GMs were polled. 4 of them, Boston's Harry Sinden, Pittsburgh's Eddie Johnston, Toronto's Jerry McNamara, and Winnipeg's John Ferguson, declined to participate in the survey. A 5th, Edmonton's Glenn Sather, isn't represented in the survey, but was due to a timing error on the part of the Hockey News that couldn't be corrected before the issue's deadline. 9 of 16 respondents said they are not satisfied with current rules regarding fighting in the NHL. Just 2 of the 16 GMs called for fighting to be punished by immediate ejection from the game, and that was Quebec's Maurice Filion and Montreal's Serge Savard, which is funny because the Montreal team in the 70s, they were pretty tough. Not Philly tough, but you had to be tough in the 70s or you were set aside pretty darn quick. 11 of the 16 said there should be increased penalties for repeat offenders. Additional comments from GMs indicated that they feel fighting, as long as a spontaneous outburst and not premeditated tactic or strategy and doesn't lead to brawling, is acceptable within the confines of the game. However, there has been concern, most recently expressed by NHL President John Ziegler, that fighting majors increased during the 85-86 season. The president provided statistics which showed 2% of the league's players are responsible for 20% of the fighting majors. That's an alarming figure, said Ziegler. And that was how it was. So you had your enforcers, and at some point during the game they'd be on the ice together, and you're watching the game, you're like, oh, Churla's out on the ice at the same time as Probert, here we go. And you knew it was coming. That was what the NHL curbed. And these rules, combined with more European players coming over, when the Iron Curtain fell and you got more Russians and Czechs into the game and there was more skill in the game, this went by the wayside, for the most part. Our game is really unique, says LA King general manager Rogi Vachon sometimes, and I'm not saying this is case every time something has to give. There has to be a release, and if you take the fighting option away, well, we're afraid high sticking would become a far greater problem than fighting is. And I've heard that. And the whole way along you'll hear, well, guys are going to take liberties with their sticks and you're going to have this problem, that problem. And I haven't really noticed the game get chippier. Remember Ken Linsman was running around the ice at the time this magazine was written? There wasn't a whole lot of times that Ken Linsman was stopped from doing something because there was an enforcer on the other team shaking a finger at him. Linsman took that as a challenge. Rule 54B states the official may call a minor, double minor, major, or game misconduct as he sees fit in any incident involving fisticuffs. What it comes down to, says Philadelphia Flyer coach Mike Keenan, is that the officials do not have a good handle on the proper interpretation of the present rules. Well, be forewarned, Mike Keenan and your coaching colleagues and the ham hands of the NHL. Those officials just may have a handle on it this season if the GM's recommendations to the governors mirror those of the survey. Until the attitude of everyone in the NHL changes, Savard says, fighting is here to stay. It's just that simple. That's Serge Savard, the GM of the Montreal Canadiens. Isn't that funny? That's 31 years ago, and we're still talking about fighting. And it's down. It's at record low numbers. And yet in 86, there they were saying, oh, we're going to try to ban fighting. Insane. North Stars draft selection, Amir Babe. Warren Babe, the left winger, 6'2" from Lethbridge. Still doesn't ring a bell. Well, most Montreal fans didn't know him either, but Minnesota, Chicago, and Boston sure did. The Bruins and Blackhawks drafting 13th and 14th reportedly both were interested in Babe, who rated a second rounder by Central Scouting, but the North Stars took him first. They had a more publicized wingers: Mark Pedersen, Everett Sanapas, George Pelawa, and Jeff Greenlaw. It's so weird. The boss fights the good fight, and this was Mike Bossy saying he didn't agree with fighting in the NHL and thought it should be banned. NHL's GM fighting survey. Yeah, wow. Scotty Bowman, fights have always been there. Just take steps to make sure they're not used as a tactic. Cliff Fletcher, I'm satisfied with current rules, but not the way that they're being interpreted. If the aggressor in a fight is always given an extra penalty, fighting will virtually disappear. Jim Devellano, leave the game alone. It's doing perfectly well, thank you. I think fighting issue is overblown. Glenn Sather, oh yeah, there's nothing there. Emile Francis, instigator should be penalized more than he is. Fans pay to see better players play. And that's been an argument for a long time. Rogi Vachon, you can't ban fighting. Hockey superstars take care of themselves. If they're challenged, they'll fight back, and that means they'd be out of the game. Lou Nanny, I don't buy the excuses for fighting. It's not a safety valve, and it's not needed to sell the game. Serge Savard, there will always be fighting in hockey until everyone in the NHL believes, as I do, it's not part of a game. Until then, it's still there. Max McNabb, enforcement of the rules needs to be tightened, and repeat offenders should get longer suspensions. Craig Patrick, I don't support immediate ejection for fighting because it will mean players will try to get even by using their sticks, a very poor alternative. Bobby Clark, as long as fighting is spontaneous and reaction and not used as a means of eliminating a player, then I think it should be allowed and punishable by a 5-minute major. Maurice Filion, there's too much fighting in the NHL. Ron Caron, stats show almost every team dresses an enforcer or goon. I've proposed reducing roster size by 1 player, but my colleagues tell me that the enforcer would become the 17th player instead of the 18th. Jack Gordon, make stronger rules to get the troublemakers out of the game. And David Poyle, we've got to be careful how we handle fighting because it's going to impact other violence-related areas, high sticking, etc. We should be aware of what consequences to change are. And really, and again, when the Europeans come over and there's less fighting among the European players than among North American, the European game influenced North American game and has changed it forever, which meant that the enforcer, even if you have a 23-man roster, the enforcer is out. He's just not going to work. Because you can't have a guy on your roster that's only playing 4 minutes a game or 3 minutes a game and taking up that spot from some other young kid that can really play hockey. And that's really what changed it. The game itself has changed. I don't think fighting ever actually leaves the game, though. Original Sabre Perreault retires but may return. Spoiler alert, he didn't. When the Boston Bruins informed the Vancouver Canucks they would be able to make their first-round selection June 21st in the draft, General Manager Jack Gordon was a little surprised. I honestly didn't think we'd get it because we'd heard they were interested in a couple of players who were still available. Bruins General Manager Harry Sinden had the choice of taking Vancouver's first-round pick this year or next year after trading the rights of free agent Barry Peterson to Vancouver. The Bruins also received Cam Neely in the deal. Yeah, they were smart. They passed on the Dan Woodley draft pick and got Glenn Wesley the year after. Sinden evidently is betting the Canucks will finish last in their division and miss the playoffs next year. Pretty astute bet there by Harry Sinden. Whether that comes to pass remains to be seen, though Sinden will be smelling like a rose if the Canucks really slip in the tank, and he finds himself in the running for Granbury Bison's Pierre Turgeon, the man expected to be tops overall next year. Assuming Gordon doesn't obtain a high draft pick next year, Woodley will be Vancouver's first draft choice for not only 1986 but 1987 as well. I think we've got a pretty good prospect, although it's unlikely he'll be able to help us this year. Most of them need at least one more year in junior. Woodley, who had 45 goals, 47 assists, and 100 penalty minutes in 62 games. I like the way he plays at both ends of the ice, wins face-off, and really is kind of a leader on the ice. While coach Tom Watt is hardly expecting Woodley to come in and right in and make the team, he's holding out a bit of hope. He'll be given every opportunity to make the team. We were looking for a young center, and it looks like he'll be able to fit the bill at that position. He's played all three forward positions, and I thought he played pretty well through the Memorial Cup, despite the fact he was hurting. He's impressed me. The Canucks have been looking to get Neil Brady from the Medicine Hat Tigers, but New Jersey surprised a few observers by taking him third overall. Woodley looks like he'll almost certainly be a mainstay on the Canucks in a season or two. This is why I really have, prospects. A citizen of both the United States and Canada because his father, Dave, was playing professional hockey in Oklahoma City when he was born, Woodley is eligible to play for either the American or Canadian national junior teams. His parents now live in Victoria, across just 35 miles of water from Vancouver. The Canucks did not have a second-round pick in the draft, that being ceded to Philadelphia in the J.J. Daigneault trade earlier in the month. Oh, Vancouver. But with their third pick, they took Don Gibson, a winger from Winkler in Manitoba Junior League. Gibson is already committed to the Michigan State Spartans for next year. The rest of Vancouver's selections were the usual lottery tickets, until the final round when they raised a few eyebrows with the selection of Vladimir Krutov of the Soviet Union. We're just taking out some insurance in case there's ever an agreement whereby Soviet players could be allowed to come out, said Gordon. There's been a slight thawing in their position, and you never know what might happen. And of course, it was 3 years after this that happened, and Vladimir Krutov was, yep. That's, yep. NHL award winners: Hart Trophy, Wayne Gretzky; Norris Trophy, Paul Coffey; Bing Trophy, Mike Bossy; Calder, Gary Suter; Selke, Troy Murray of Chicago; Vezina Trophy, John Van Beesbrook; and Adams Award, Glenn Sather. Gretzky's total points for votes: 281. Mario Lemieux was second with 163, and Mark Howe was third with 32. So Gretzky was the best guy in the league by a lot. It wasn't even close. He won 6 consecutive Hart trophies. There was never a question about whether or not he was gonna win. The legend of Pelawa grows. That's so weird. The icebox cometh. What William the Refrigerator Perry is to the Chicago Bears, George Pelawa may be to the Calgary Flames. The 6'3", 235-pound right winger from Bemidji, Minnesota, I just brutalized that, was unveiled as the Flames' number 1 selection at the National Hockey League entry draft. For sheer size, there was no bigger choice in the draft than Pelawa, who has been disguised as a bull in a china closet. Isn't that a china shop? Man, they butchered that. Said Flames general manager Cliff Fletcher, we wanted a big winger and we got one. And more. Pelawa, fresh out of high school, has proven himself to be a versatile athlete. He was an all-state linebacker and was debating whether to accept a football scholarship from the University of Minnesota. He also played baseball and ran 100 and 200-yard events in track, excelling in both sports. His lone failure was swimming. I can't float. I got heavy bones and I keep sinking, Pelawa explained. In terms of hockey ability, Big George earned the nickname Great White Shark for the way he devoured the opposition. In a game last year, Pelawa knocked out a rival skater using only his chest. He drew a 2-minute roughing penalty on the play. See, now if Kevin Bieksa watches this video and hears that, he's gonna be like, I can do that. I can jump and hit them with my chest. On another occasion, in a game against Tom Fitzgerald, the New York Islanders' number 1 pick, Pelawa was knocked to the ice. Unaccustomed to such treatment, Pelawa skated over to Fitzgerald and threatened to break his arm. I don't remember that incident, but I probably did it. That sounds like me, he said. Then there was a time Pelawa, 18, went chasing after some bullies who'd been harassing his brother. Not his younger brother, but his older one. Pelawa's biggest impression may have been made last summer in a junior select hockey camp in Colorado. It was there that the icebox delivered he could compete with the best players in the world. When I was in Colorado, I discovered I could play with all those other people. I decided to give up football and go into hockey. He scored 29 goals, 55 points in 26 games, the high school totals. And since fighting wasn't allowed in the high school league, Pelawa's aggressive tendencies were pretty much held in check. I like to work at the front of the net and into the corners. I'll have to fight if I play that way. I'm not a goon. I can put the puck in the net. One draft observer remarked that only two things could keep Pelawa out of the NHL: a knife and a fork. Meaning diet. Weird. Minnesota North Stars GM Lou Nanne went on record stating he wouldn't waste his first or second pick on Pelawa, but Fletcher was of a different opinion. He said Pelawa's body fat measured at a scant 10%. He was a good middle linebacker in football. He ran 100 yards in 11 seconds, and he can still grow. He'll be the biggest winger in the NHL when he gets there. Obviously, he's not ready to play with us yet, but he'll be an impact player when he steps into our lineup. Buffalo Sabres Scotty Bowman's top choice, saying Pelawa would be given the necessary time to develop with the Flames. For a team that can afford to wait, he might be a very good one. He's a project, said Bowman. Built like a housing project, Pelawa said he was most happy about being claimed by Calgary. When asked which hockey player he admired, Pelawa replied, Joel Otto with the Flames. He kicked the puck in the net on the Vancouver Canucks 3 years from now, and it was awesome. Oh, no, that's just me. Joel Otto, I used to watch him play at Bemidji State. Pelawa's immediate future may take him to the University of North Dakota. He never played. It's so weird. So again, this is why I buy these. I buy these because there's information from 30 years ago, and I remember. So when people ask me, and they're like, "Oh, Shannon's throwing shade at this prospect. Shannon's not taking that prospect seriously. He really doesn't understand." Oh, I understand, because I've heard it before, many, many, many times over for 35 years. This prospect's going to be great, and then he makes the NHL, and it just doesn't work. Or sometimes they just don't make the NHL. Sometimes they end up in Europe, and sometimes the game changes. So by the time they're ready for the NHL has progressed to a point where it doesn't really require their services anymore. So it's just the way it is. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Again, it's just fun looking back to 1986, I should say. A year that I remember well, a year that most of you weren't around for, and that's just the nature of the internet. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And if you're a Red Wings fan, hey, I didn't talk about Joe Murphy. So, there's a benefit to that, because Joe Murphy's time in Detroit was, he wasn't really the savior that he was expected to be. The savior for the team was actually this Yzerman kid that was already there. But maybe I'll get into that another time. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.